My father was born in New Orleans in 1920, and he died in 2011. He was 91. We had lived here since 1960, but he wasn't here. My sister and brother-in-law had taken him to Indiana to live with them because my brother-in-law was retired and could take care of him, and he had lost his eyesight and the use of his legs. And per his wishes, there was no service, there was no memorial, and he was immediately cremated. So I wasn't there. I don't know what I could have done, but I wasn't there. I got a phone call. And my sister says, "Daddy's gone." I don't know what I said. I don't remember that. I remember that the first thing that popped into my mind was, who's going to tell me stories now? And my father was a master storyteller. He didn't think about it that way. He didn't study it. The things that he studied and had passion about and made a living from were far removed from storytelling. He just knew he could do it, and people liked listening to it. He would take a grain of truth and embellish it and polish it and hone it until it was a piece of modern folklore. And people loved listening to it. I remember once sitting down and writing down one-sentence definitions of each story I could remember, hearing all my life these stories over and over again, and I came up with 47 stories that if I assumed his persona, thought I could get up on stage and tell them. And he was great at one-liners. He just had this skewed view of life, and he could just say something regarding whatever was going on at the moment that would bring people to laughing to tears. But he never said "I love you" to anybody but my mother. He didn't hug anybody. He didn't want anybody to get near him and touch him. I was a disappointment. I didn't come out the way he wanted, and he never quite explained to me how I was supposed to come out, but I didn't come out that way, so I was a disappointment, and I was lazy, and I was going down the wrong road. I didn't know there was another road. I was, and we wound up on opposite ends of the ideological spectrum. And he didn't hesitate to tell me these things. And my mother died 10 years before him. And he just, I was taking care of him, and I was getting nothing but verbal abuse. But when he died, I felt this emptiness. Something was missing. And I struggled. I struggled with saying, well, this guy, I know he was my father, but he verbally abused me. He wasn't nice to me. What am I missing? What's the problem here? And a few months after he died, I woke up one morning, and it was just clear to me. It was the stories. Unbeknownst to my father or me, all my life, he had been teaching me how to tell stories just by telling them. And he had been teaching me how to say zingers when something happened. And the things that we did get along on were, well, he introduced me to Charlie Chaplin, Buster Keaton, Harold Lloyd, Groucho Marx, Laurel and Hardy, W.C. Fields, and later he brought home Jonathan Winter's albums and the great comic Stan Freberg, and I listened to all that over and over again. And I was his apprentice. He would never have said that. He didn't realize that. He didn't think of himself as a storyteller. You couldn't write down anything he told. You couldn't tell it unless you were him, and you couldn't read it. And I realized, the few $1,000s and a couple of pieces of furniture were nothing. What was invaluable, the true inheritance that I got that was worth everything, was the fact that I'm up here right now telling you a story. I got some ashes in a little chest. This bead was made by a woman named Janine Scott, whom some of you may know. She was a Manitou glass artist. She now lives in Conifer, and it has some of his ashes inside of it. And I brought it with me just in case I screwed up. I thought maybe he would probably tell me. This thing would start to glow, What the hell are you talking about? So that, I realized I loved him. I loved him for that, for something neither of us knew we were doing. We were just doing it. And I'm grateful for turning out the way I did. Now, I can't leave without giving you a couple little snippets of the old man, because he was a crackerjack. The best one-liner I ever heard him tell. We had a neighbor when we lived in Whitefield who kept his grass just like Patty Jewett Golf Course. He went out there with a ruler and made sure it was all even, the same height. And he used Scott's Turf Builder and some kind of magical plant grower and weed be gone. And then this was pre-weed whacker days. So he got down on his hands and knees with a trimming tool and went around the lawn. My father's lawn care consisted of every couple of weeks in that thick New Orleans accent that he held on to, even though we'd lived here for 50 years. Every couple of weeks he'd go, "Charles, lawn's looking a little raggedy. Run that mower over it and see any weeds, pull them up." So our lawn was marginal. And this guy, apparently, it really bugged him that my father didn't care about his lawn. And they're out there talking one day. And I was standing there listening to them, and they're having a conversation, and right in the middle of it, the guy snapped. The lawn thing just got to him. He lost it. Right in the middle of the conversation, he just said, "Bill, when in God's name is your lawn going to look like mine?" And my father said, without skipping a beat, "When it snows." I had to go inside. Now, he had a philosophy about storytelling, but there again, this is one of these things where he didn't sit down and formulate his philosophy about storytelling. This was all natural to him. And I want to give you an idea of that because it's also my philosophy. One of the stories that we always heard ever since I was a toddler was the pelican story. He and his friend Andrew Hero, who was my godfather, lived in New Orleans, and one year in the middle of winter, they were walking along the banks of Lake Pontchartrain, and they found a frozen pelican. And they brought it home. They took it to Andrew's house. And, as the old man tells it, it defrosted and came back to life. and started flapping around the living room and knocking stuff off of shelves and wreaking havoc. And Andrew's mother came downstairs and screamed, "Get that bird out of my house." And my father had to grab its legs, and Andrew had to grab its neck, and they had to wrestle it out of the front door, and flew away. And he'd been telling this to me since I was a toddler, at least once a year. So I don't know what was wrong with my mind, but I believed it. I never questioned it. And it got more elaborate every year. One day in the mid-'70s, Andrew and his wife came to visit. My sister and I weren't living at home anymore, but we came over because we loved Andrew. And without realizing that the only person left alive who knew the real facts of that story was sitting right next to him, the old man launches into the pelican story. And it was more elaborate than I had ever heard in my life. I believe at the end the pelican was speaking in tongues. And he got through, and this is where his philosophy on storytelling comes out, and it's mine too. And Andrew said, "Bill, that didn't happen. The bird melted and it stunk to high heaven. And my mother came downstairs and said, 'Get that stinking dead animal out of my house.' And we just had to take it back and throw it in the lake." Without skipping a beat, the old man looked around at everybody and said, "Yeah, well, what the heck kind of story does that make?" And that's how I feel about it. And I am a good one-liner and a good storyteller because of that old man that I loved, who never told me and I never told him. So I'm just going to leave you with a line from a singer, songwriter, poet named Amanda Palmer that I really love, from one of her songs. If someone won't let you love them while they're here, you're going to have to love them after they're gone. Thank you.